Well, Scott's, we know Scott, and he's one of our best, and we love him. We're lucky to have him. I look back at some of his previous lessons, and one of them I remember his grandparents were growing up in a strong influence on him in a small town in western Tennessee, I believe. Is that right?
I was in West Tennessee the other day.
And that was a great lesson. And then his favorite hymn lesson, I remember that one. What was that hymn, Scott?
Holy, holy, holy.
Holy, holy, holy. So, Scott, they stick with us. So you got to be a good teacher to look back that far. So come on up.
Thank you. I got to refill my coffee to keep going. Which is dangerous for y'all too, because that means I'll talk more.
Didn't work.
Is there any in there?
There's a little bit, doesn't
Okay.
it? All right, there we go. I had to tell y'all this is number 3 for this morning. So you get what you pay for. All righty. Share the screen. Okay, it's recording. Turn off all these goofy things so I don't have to look at them. Hide the meeting controls. Put the picture up. And go. Okay. So this is a repeat, right? We talked about this in 2013.
I remember it well.
Yeah. But it's a thing that I think is really important to us as Methodists, right? This is a core part of the beliefs of the Methodist Church, the general rules of the United Methodist Church, right? So, well, we'll use this one. Who's that? JW, right? So John Wesley was the founder and originator of the Methodist movement. Remember, this was a movement. He said, get y'all together in small groups and work hard on your faith, but y'all need to be in church on Sunday, okay? And we've talked about this before, and I'm not going to go down this path, but we didn't become a church until the Revolution. And the Methodist Church became a church here long before it was a church over there, right? Because Wesley was a priest in the Church of England, and he never left, But as he began to help people grow into these societies, everybody started coming to him, saying, okay, so how does this work? And help me to understand, help me to know how I should live, help me to know how to pray, help me to know how to think about things. This reminds me of when the disciples went to Jesus and said, teach us how to pray. John told his disciples, you need to show us, right? And so he began going from just preaching to crowds to collecting people into societies and classes and coming together for growth and supervision. By supervision, I mean somebody helping you stay on track, right? And this was a big deal, right? So these societies, people understand, what did it mean to act out a life of a kingdom person? What kind of behaviors do we see? What kind of love do we share? But he was also very, very clear that salvation comes through faith, not through the things that you do. Grace is preparing us for salvation before we come to know Christ. Grace justifies us and brings us into right relationship. Grace continues to help us to be perfected and to grow as we grow in our life. And that a consequence of the movement of grace in our lives is we behave and we love and we push things out, right? So the things we do are a response, not a cause of that salvation. And so there's an awesome comic online I want to share. Oh, let me share it again because I think I have shared it without sharing all of the magic. So let's do a share again and hit the button so we get animation and sound. Alrighty. So let me turn all this stuff off again. There's a comic online called Wesley Bros, right? It's John and Charles, but they're kind of set today. So they started separate from the Methodist Church. If you go to look at it, there's only a few animated ones, but they do a weekly animated strip and then have a discussion about the relation of that to the history of the church and the doctrines and the beliefs of the church. So they're going to talk to us for a second. We hope. Come on, buddy.
Hey, brother, looks like you're loading up on math calculators. But why?
I'm planning to give these out at our next class meeting. It seems the members of our Methodist Society have forgotten the most basic rules for holy living.
And just how will an abacus make a difference?
They can count. Three general rules.
Oh, like stop, look, listen, or shake, rattle, and roll.
No, brother. You know our general rules. Do no harm. Do good. Attend upon all the ordinances of God.
Or, as I like to say, practice showing up for God. Count that on your abacus.
Our rules equal guidelines that show we're serious about salvation.
Brother, you can count on me to help you keep them accountable. I can do math and music, you know.
In summary, 3 rules help us love one God and save many souls.
It's a cool little comic. But so, the general rules of the United Societies, right? Of course, John used way more words than those guys did, because he always does. One condition previously required of those who desire admission into these societies, a desire to flee from the wrath to come
We'll need it to take
and to be saved from their sins.
Yeah.
But wherever this is really fixed in the soul, it will be shown by its fruits. It's expected of all who continue in these societies that they should continue to evidence their desire of salvation, first, by doing no harm, by avoiding evil of every kind, especially that which is most generally practiced. Secondly, by doing good, by being in every kind merciful after their power and as they have opportunity, doing good of every possible sort as far as possible to all people. Thirdly, by attending upon all the ordinances of God. So, do no harm, do good.
I can't sit here with my feet down. My legs are killing me.
Within the structure of our discipline,
I'll break my feet.
boom.
I think we're okay.
Yeah, classroom has, yeah, there you go, there you go. Awesome. Okay, so within the structure of, we just had general conference a while back, and that's where they go through all the rules and all the rules and all the rules and all the rules and all the rules. There are a category of things in the discipline that cannot be changed, period, full stop. The articles of religion, which is the basic statements of belief of the church, and the general rules. Those within the United Methodist Church are not subject to amendment by the General Conference, period. Can't change them. We're not going to say, oh, we were mistaken. There's not 3 parts of the Trinity. It's really a quadrinity. No. And we're not going to say, oh, let's forget about that doing good thing, right? Those are things that can't change. And so these become our basis. But again, they're kind of vague. Well, that's because John actually talked a lot more. He said more. So there's a really, really good little book called 3 Simple Rules. Reuben Job, Bishop, wrote this. Bishop Reuben Job. And if you happen to go look in our current hymnal in the very front and like the copyright and who's responsible, he was also chairman of the committee to do the 1984 hymnal, which is the one that we use. So this book is maybe a 1/4 inch thick, and it's only this big. My Sunday school class spent a half a year on it. Because what does it mean? How do I need to be serious about living my life if I believe those 3 rules, right? There's another book you've probably seen that's very similar. In His Steps, Sound familiar? Charles Sheldon. This was published in like 1890 something and is still in publication. And it's the story of a pastor who, after a very momentous Sunday morning, decided, okay, for the next 90 days, I'm going to live making every decision considering what would Jesus do in this situation. And it led to that being taken up to the people close around him and his congregation and his town, and it led to substantial changes. Now, it's a fictional book, but it shows you how your influence trickles out, ripples out like waves. All of this also kind of reminds me and comes back to the verse we had today from Matthew, where, if you remember, the Pharisees are like, quizzing Jesus and say, what is the greatest commandment? And he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend the whole law and the prophets. Now, one of the interesting things that you'll see in many Bible translations is when a passage in the New Testament is written in small caps. That is to say, all caps, kind of bigger and little. That means it's quoting back to the Old Testament. It's a quotation from the Old Testament. This is the Shema of Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and soul, mind, and strength. You shall bind these words upon your hand and upon your head and place them on your doorposts and tell everybody around you and tell your kids, right? It's been the heart of Israel since the Exodus. And then the rabbis, in their discussions, and said, okay, this other one from Leviticus 19, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This was since it's not Jesus picking a fight with something weird and radical, this was what the Pharisees should have known from their own rabbinical discussions, right? But they go together for us today as well. Again, though, it's like, okay, so we're kind of like the people who go to the Pharisees. What does that mean? Well, so what's Jesus talking about? He's talking about a bunch of things. He's looking at what's your attitude as you interact with other people. What's your attitude towards them, towards yourself, towards a relationship between you all? What's your attitude as you go through the day? What's your attitude towards God? What's your motivation in a certain situation? Right? Why am I doing this? Why am I going to go do the thing I do or not do the thing I do? What's the thing that I ultimately do or don't do? And then what are the effects of that? Right? So there's kind of layers and layers and layers and layers of this onion to think about. And I think that we're expected kind of like to rely on that grace to help us to become more sanctified and lead us in the way of being kingdom people through this, right? We have to trust that. And I think the other big thing with all of this is that we're called to act on purpose, not just roll along and let stuff happen to us. Act on purpose and to choose and consider what we're doing and what effects it has around us. How are those ripples going to go out? Are they going to be ripples that help? Are they going to be, the ripples that help my dog get his ball from the middle of the pool when he drops it in the pool? Are they going to be the ripples that wash over and destroy things? So let's look at those three messages real quick. Do no harm. This is the hard one. This is the hard one. The other two, I think we'll see, are pretty straightforward. But the hard one is do no harm, because it's about thinking further down the road, right? So John Wesley expands on this, and he says, first, by doing no harm, by avoiding evil of every kind, especially that which is most generally practiced, such as taking of the name of God in vain, profaning the day of the Lord, either by doing ordinary work therein or buying or selling, drunkenness, buying and selling spirituous liquors, or drinking them unless in cases of extreme necessity, like a dinner at Jeff's house. Slaveholding, buying or selling slaves, fighting, quarreling, brawling, brother going to law with brother, returning evil for evil, railing for railing, using many words in buying or selling goods that have not paid the duty, giving or taking things on usury, uncharitable or unprofitable conversations, particularly speaking evil of magistrates, of ministers. And he's talking about bad-mouthing the government more than your pastor, right? Doing to others as they should do unto us, doing what we know is not for the glory of God, putting on costly apparel, taking such diversions and cannot be used in the name of God, singing those songs or reading those books which do not tend to the knowledge of God. Remember the directions for singing? Learn all these first. Softness and needness, self-indulgence, laying up treasure on earth, borrowing without a possibility of paying, or taking up goods without a probability of paying for them. Long list. But the big thing there is, think about when I do something or don't do something, who might be harmed? Is it me? Am I doing something that's somewhat self-destructive or very self-destructive? Am I doing something that directly hurts somebody else? Am I doing something that destroys the creation of God in some way? Or am I doing something that destroys or hurts God's name and reputation? Go read Chronicles and all those times that God got pretty darn miffed at the Israelites for doing something that made him look bad, right? And we see that. That's one we see all the time where people go around being very overtly top-level Christians and then doing things that you say, really? Really? I saw a video this week of a pastor who was talking about, well, what we really need to do is, he was talking about the Me Too situation, of taking some of those women who are clearly making false reports and executing a few of them, and it would keep the rest from doing it. And he's doing this from the pulpit. I'm like, I think you missed a message there. You didn't get a memo somewhere along the line, all right? But we have to think about who is being harmed. Do no harm. Okay, so what are the implications of the thing we're doing? How are they being harmed? Is somebody being harmed by me doing something? By my action? Are they being harmed by me standing back and doing nothing? Right? Is it not me individually, but a group that I'm a part of that's doing something or not doing something? Right? Or is it the way that society has kind of evolved in a way that some people win and other people then lose, right? And they don't have to. So how do I balance what I'm doing? And I'm not making any claims that this is an easy thing. When we're talking about big issues, there's no easy fix, there's no quick fix. But unless we start stepping towards a fix, nothing happens. Paul tells us, do not repay evil for evil. Be careful to do what's right in the eyes of everyone. If it's possible, as far as depends on you, live at peace with everyone. You know, and that doesn't mean be a pushover. That means consider what you're doing and how it affects other people. And this is easy in this world. When we think about do no harm, this is why I say do no harm is far and away the hardest. We can get stuck and paralyzed. Oh my goodness, what if I do this? What if I do this? And then we do nothing. And then we go back to, is my inaction hurting someone? Am I missing opportunities that would have helped somebody, right? And this is why Wesley's intention was for us to be purposeful and to think about the effects. We can always go think and think and think and think and think and get to a place where we just do nothing. And you have to kind of say, what can I do? And what can I do right now? Right? So it kind of makes me think about, that my wife Kathleen is vegan. She eats no animal products, no milk, no dairy, no meat. We don't drive cars with leather. She doesn't do wool. And so she understands that there's certainly a rational limit to what she can do. She's like, look, I don't live in a cave, I live in a house. My house has drywall. You know how that paper is held on the gypsum board? With glue. With glue that's made out of collagen, which is an animal product, right? I'm living in a house. I'm not going outside. So it's a matter of thinking what she can do, right? You read about some of the Buddhist monks who take this same approach and then ask for forgiveness every time they inhale because they're sure that they've inhaled maybe living bugs and microbes, because they're just as much part of God's creation and just as living, right? And so we laugh at it, but it's where can we do and where do we stop, and are we justified in stopping? And it's an impossible question to me, but the real key is to understand what are the direct effects of what we do and what are the indirect effects of what we do. And being paralyzed is not the goal. It's being active and moving towards doing no harm. It's being clear about those things that I can do, I'm gonna do, right? So a couple of examples. One of them that is funny that he calls out is this whole drunkenness thing, right? And on the one hand, we think about, okay, sure, drunk driving, bad news. You can make a mess out of somebody else. You can make a mess out of yourself. Did you realize that the Women's Christian Temperance Union was a Methodist organization? Having missed the bus on slavery, they jumped on that bus for drinking and doubled down. And then finally had to relent somewhat. But, you know, we use grape juice still in communion, right? You know that Mr. Welch was a Methodist? There's a reason for everything. But the thing with any kind of toilet alcohol abuse, drug abuse, substance abuse, there's a lot more societal costs. You know, look at the relationship between abusive behaviors and domestic violence, abusive behaviors and crimes, and so all of these things get wrapped up together. So as we can do things like, you know, if you're a server in a bar, don't keep giving a drunk guy more drinks. But you can also work towards helping those who are trapped. Slaveholding, we don't think about slavery. Did you realize that when Francis Asbury was first ordained as the first Methodist superintendent / bishop, he didn't like the word bishop, but all the people who were in the church started calling him that, so he got stuck with it. In the very first book of discipline, when the Methodist Church was formed, he said, you can't be a slaveholder and be a Methodist. And all those folks in Virginia said, we'll just take our ball and go home. They said, you can either have a church or not, right? And he kind of relented, hoping that it would be solved. And it took another 150 years for that within the church to be solved. And then the effects still linger today, right? So when we think of that, it's not just the slavery of the Civil War and enslaving African Americans here. Slavery is a broad thing around the world in lots of different ways. Lots of people get trafficked. We think about sex trafficking, but lots of, you know, domestic workers in the lower tier hotels are trafficked people who have been brought here and then their documents taken by somebody and they're just as stuck, right? We look at a lot of products that we use every day, and I'm guilty. I have an iPhone, right? Apple has forever had issues with Chinese slave labor making components for iPhones. And, you know, my gut is that if you buy anything from Temu, a slave made it. And it wasn't a slave who was motivated to get it right, because 9/10 of that stuff doesn't work. It's cheap, but it doesn't work. So slavery is a thing. It's a thing, and we need to look out for its modern appearances and do things to help avoid it. And you know, TSA had this big campaign in the airports and stuff, and I see things around for people who are being trafficked. He talks about usury, you know, unlawful interest, and we think immediately of payday loans. But just having a consumerist society that encourages people to do credit cards and look at how many people who can't afford it. And so even things like The fact that a lot of stores go to a no cash, you have to have a credit card, makes it so that the people who can't afford it are then on that edge of doing more than they should because it's swipe the card, right? And so we as individuals, we as a church, we as friends, as a society have to think about some of the implications. So there's a bunch of people within the church who are thinking about things, well, how does this play out today? And, you know, they've come up with some ideas around this as sort of a modern approach, around, you know, digitally, avoiding things like cyberbullying, spewing crap on Facebook and Twitter, right? Posting things that are clearly dumb or that are mean-spirited and demean other people, harmful online sorts of stuff. That's an easy one, you know? Avoiding things that are destructive to our environment and around us, you know, or that are destructive disproportionately. Looking at how our products come to be and avoiding the ones that are more harmfully impactful. You know, being careful about our speech to avoid, you know, euphemisms that put people down, thinking about what we say. And, you know, things like, okay, so he talked about skimming on your taxes a little bit. He's like, you know, avoid being unethical. Think about what you're doing so that you're not harming, because you feel like, oh, that's no big deal. But if you then are a part of a society and then you're choosing to not do your agreed upon part, you're hurting everyone around you and weakening the society. So it comes back to, who's being harmed? Me? Somebody else? All of creation? Or God's name and God's reputation? Are people looking at my behavior and saying, you a Christian? You talk about going to church? And how are they being harmed? By me doing something, not doing something, by the way a group operates, by the way we've let society become. So do no harm. Hard, hard, hard. Do good, we kind of feel like we understand, right? We can get a kind of feeling for what are the things that are doing good. John Wesley says, by doing good in being in every kind merciful after their power as they have opportunity, doing good of every possible sort and as far as possible to all people, to their bodies, of the ability which God giveth, by giving food to the hungry, clothing the naked, visiting or helping them that are sick or in prison, to their souls, by instructing, reproving, exhorting all we have any intercourse with, trampling not underfoot that enthusiastic doctrine that we are not to do good unless our hearts be free to it. By doing good, especially to them that are of the household of faith, or groaning so to be, employing them preferably to others, buying one of another, helping each other in business, and so much more because the world will love its own and them only. By all possible diligence and frugality, that the gospel be not blamed. By running with patience the race which is set before them, by denying themselves and taking up their cross daily, submitting to bear the reproach of Christ, to be as filth and offscouring of the world, and looking that men should say all manner of evil of them falsely for the Lord's sake. So, some of these come out pretty straightforward, but they're important to look at. I mean, and in this church, we do an awful lot for people who are doing things. I mean, we have things like going the Kenya programs with Divine Providence. We have lots of people who have come out of this church, like the Moods, who are serving as missionaries. We have things like Field Day. We have opportunities as individuals to do things like organ donation, right? I just got an email this summer from, years ago, we had the bone marrow people come and sign everybody up. They just sent me an email saying, yeah, you're out. They told me I'd aged out. And I'm like, me? But like, so this one is CORE, which is the I don't even know what CORE stands for, but they're organ donation recruiting. And this is because my dad was driving to volunteer at the zoo in Pittsburgh and came down the street. And there's this giant billboard with his face on it. Because he's an organ donor, right? He gave a kidney to his brother. And then when my stepbrother died, they cut him up all over the place. They sliced him up for a whole bunch of people. But there's lots of things that we can understand that are doing good. Now, go back to this harm thing. We have to understand our motivations. Not that we're doing good for somebody. Oh, you poor people who are in a worse spot, I'm going to go and help you out of my elevated spot. It's no, because we're all children of God. We're all children of God. We're all created in the image of God. We're all in need of the grace of God. It's not one is better. One just happens to have a way to help, right? So, a really good current example. Did y'all hear it rained a lot up in the mountains recently? So, my aunt and uncle live on top of a mountain. They live up in Burnsville, North Carolina, which is about an hour northeast of Asheville. They live at the very end of a 5-mile private road that requires 4-wheel drive. I went to visit them Labor Day weekend. I made it for the first turn, spun out, and called my uncle, said, you got to come get me. I can't get my car up this. They had just put new gravel down, and it was real deep and spinny. You know, I've made it up there when it was less. She's 86, he's 89. They got no business living at the end of a road by themselves, right? Oh, no, by the way, he's got a pacemaker and a defibrillator. So of course, right? So when first of all, they moved to the mountain after Hurricane Hugo when they lived in Charleston. So they're on top of the mountain, and nobody realized this was going to be this kind of an event. And they're on the top of the mountain, so they're not getting flooding. But they're on the top of the mountain. And so they're getting trees and trees and trees and trees. And they're there by themselves. He keeps a generator, so they had some power, but they were stuck for 6 days. But their neighbors came and brought them off the mountain on ATVs. My aunt was like, let's go ride these some more. I like this. My uncle's like, this is killing my back. I'm not doing that. They brought them down. They gave them a place to stay, right? And then they went back up and cleared the road all the way up to the house. And have been putting temporary, they look after the old folks on the hill, right? They're not the oldest on that mountain. There's a woman a couple years older than my uncle that they sent a helicopter for. She wasn't there. She had walked down the mountain to the neighbor's house. But the neighbors went up and put temporary patches on to keep the water from getting in the house, right? And oh, by the way, it's not like their houses didn't get whacked too, right? This whole town is kind of like beat. When they were trying to find out why the TV was not coming to cover things in Burnsville, they said, Asheville's been destroyed, but Burnsville is a dangerous place for us to go into. And it's still, they're saying, don't come. You know, it's people helping people even when they're in a bad spot, right? That's what do good is. So doing good to those of the household of faith, employing them preferably. Job networking jumps out in my mind, how we have traditionally and forever been helping people with finding jobs who are in bad spots around this church. So we do things like that, and many people in here are part of this, right? And it all comes back to, again, in Matthew, where the people who were separated as goats said, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you, or as sheep rather, feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me, right? And doing good is sometimes hard too, right? Is that person asking you for money on the street, needing it or not? Sometimes I tell myself, I'm in a hurry. Sometimes I tell myself, if I give them money and they misuse it, that's on them. That's on them. I've responded to a need. And if they're misrepresenting themselves, I've responded to what's presented to me as a genuine need. So attending to the ordinances of God, what does that mean? That we translate that as stay in love with God. So a couple of examples of continuing in relationships. So my grandparents, this is my dad's parents, they were married for 66 years. After grandmother died, granddad was in assisted living, and I was up staying with him kind of looking after him while my dad was out of town. And he and I went out to dinner. I said, Granddad, and this is when Granddad couldn't tell you what he had for breakfast, right? I said, Granddad, when did you and Grandmother meet? He goes, oh, that was on June 6th, 1938. We had gone to a church meeting, and after church meeting, and I met her, we walked home together, and neither one ever dated anybody else. That date, he would tell you everything about it, right? 66 years, they looked after each other. I never once saw my grandfather cook anything. I never once in my entire life saw my grandmother wash a dish. Ever. Right? They looked after each other. My mom died a year ago. This one was one, they took a picture at church of her and my stepdad. You know, they looked after each other. She had colon cancer, and then he had all kind of pancreatic stuff, and then she had dementia and a stroke, and then multiple myeloma, and then they kept looking after each other. And through it all, they ministered to people together. She took a house that had been given to their church and turned it into a place for missionaries to stay when they were home on leave. She went with him to go do prison ministry, which was not her favorite thing, but then she loved it, right? So they continued to support each other. And the thing is, how do you make a relationship last? Well, first of all, you don't take each other for granted. Second of all, you have to do the things that keep you together, right? You have to stay connected. You have to make time for each other. You have to be purposeful, that word purposeful again, in being in love and staying in love. And so when John Wesley talks about attend to the ordinances of God, this is what he's talking about. He says, attend upon the ordinances of God, such as the public worship of God, ministry of the word, read or expounded, supper of the Lord, family and private prayer, searching of the scriptures, fasting or abstinence, and all of the other things that we call spiritual disciplines, the things that we do on purpose to cultivate the relationship, right? And I think that's a key thing. And it's interesting, like if you kind of go and search around and look for how do these rules get expressed today? Well, we saw the ones that include things like cyberbullying and the do no harm. And in the do good, they kind of get repackaged into the things we do today. Nobody ever touches these. I mean, they haven't changed. Attend to worship. Make time for God, right? Make time for prayer. Make time for the sacraments. So we're called to do that kind of a thing. And so these three rules, where do we see them in scriptures in the life of Jesus? And how can we take that into ourselves to be kingdom people, right? How can we keep doing that? C.S. Lewis, this is a quote that I just recently found, and I think it's really good. C.S. Lewis said in Mere Christianity, good and evil both increase at compound interest. This is why the little decisions you and I make every day are of such infinite importance. The smallest good act today is the capture of a strategic point from which a few months later you may be able to go on to victories you never dreamed of. And the converse is also true. The littlest thing may weaken someone else and weaken them, right? So little things can make a really big difference. Wesley said, these are the general rules of our society, all of which are taught of God to observe, even in his written word. There's nothing non-biblical about these, right? Which is the only rule and the sufficient rule both of our faith and our practice. And all these we know his Spirit writes on truly awakened hearts. Paul says in Galatians, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. And then he says in Philippians, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Whatever you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Finally, John Wesley says later on about this Methodist movement and about how these general rules and the spirit moving within the movement continue. He says, I'm not afraid that the people called Methodists should ever cease to exist, either in Europe or in America. But I am afraid lest they should only exist as a dead sect, having the form of religion without the power. And this undoubtedly will be the case unless they hold fast both the doctrine, spirit, and discipline with which they first set out. So he's calling us to be purposeful and to focus and to remember, do no harm, do good, and stay in love with God. Thoughts, questions, stuff like that? I think these are important to just kind of let percolate. They've been a part of our Methodist movement for 250, through almost 300 years now. And they make good sense. They're a good synopsis of an awful lot of what Jesus said.
Scott,
Yeah.
2 recommended books. Can you give us 2 recommended books?
Well, certainly that 3 Simple Rules by Reuben Job. And then the other one is A Celebration of Discipline by Richard Foster. It's more about that last one, Stay in Love with God, right? Oh, and then a third one by Roberta Bondi called To Love as God Loves. And it's about the monks who went to the desert in the 4th century and tried to figure out, okay, so what does that mean? How do we do this, right? I loved that one. That was another small one that was really impactful to me. And you can usually find it in Amazon used for about $3.
What was the name of it?
It's To Love as God's Love by Roberta Bondi. She was a professor at Emory. She's retired now. Yeah,
Could you give us a little update on the Biblical History Center?
Biblical History Center. Okay, so nativity tours start, I think, next week or maybe the week after. So we have a Christmas themed tour around the garden. And if you're in town, think about going down to LaGrange on either the night of the 23rd or even Christmas Eve, because we do a special tour that is a nighttime tour. And I think that they're having a choir go around with you in the tour to do music that's appropriate to the message at each of the different places in the garden. But yeah, so y'all need to come back down to the Biblical History Center in LaGrange. This is our local area museum of archaeological replicas that help us to understand the scriptures by understanding really the setting. You know, so when Jesus talks about the soil being scattered on the different kind, or the seed being scattered on the different kinds of soil, what does he mean? Like what constitutes good soil to them? And you look at it and you're like, you got to be kidding me, right? If any of y'all been to Israel and you look at the ground and you say, this is good, or think about, or it's how did the people who first hear the messages? Again, another grain one. When he talks about the yield from the harvest and how sometimes it will yield, 5 or 10 or 100 fold, right? Ain't nobody in any of Galilee. When he said this, we can tell that he was in the area of Galilee where they bring out the offerings for the Feast of First Fruits. And it's the most productive area of all of Galilee, which is the most productive of all of Israel. And he says that you get a harvest of 100-fold. They're like, right, ain't nobody ever got better than about 60 around here, ever. Now, we think about, you go out to Nebraska and you put a seed in and you get like 7 combines full of stuff. Right? And so it's how do you understand all that? We currently have, this is a cool first, a joint exhibition, a traveling exhibition with the Museum of the Bible in DC on Elizabeth Elliot. Do y'all know her? Her husband was a missionary who went to South America and was killed. Not to be confused with the one who went to Papua New Guinea and was killed and eaten. And then she went back and did work amongst the people who had killed him. And this is an exhibit about her. Now, it clearly has nothing to do with, kind of the archaeological side of things, but the key is that we're beginning to establish a relationship with Museum of the Bible, right? And they're like, we got a whole bunch of stuff to send y'all after this. We are one of 8 museums in the entire world who have a long-term loan from the Israel Antiquities Authority, right? And we've renewed that. And like right before we did actually, while they were getting our stuff together to send us new stuff, the whole thing happened last October, right? And so they're like, yeah, we got a problem shipping right now. They said, we can send it to you, but you got to buy an insurance rider for shipping through a war zone. And we're like, well, what's that cost? They said, $100,000. And we said, we can wait. Our budget's not $1 million, right? We're not going to pay 10% of our budget for a 9-hour flight. But we work closely with them. They're excited. We're excited. So this is down on LaGrange. From right here, you're like an hour and a half from it. Make a day of it, come down, have a biblical meal, tour the garden, add to that. I mean, that takes about 3 hours. So then go over to Callaway because Callaway is one of our big supporters, or go over to Hill and Dale's, which is, Callanwald. Hill and Dale's is kind of like the Callanwald of the Callaways, right? It's the Callaways home. And we're real close there. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on down there. It's certainly worth getting carloads and heading down there. And this is a good time with the Christmas stuff, right? So, thanks much.
I tell you, Scott, great job. Really enjoyed that. 3 simple rules. So, again, what I found interesting in talking to some of the people in this class over the last couple of months and years is how long our wedding anniversaries have been. Every time we put them up on the chart, we have people with 60 years, 50 years, 40 years. And it's interesting, I talked to all the guys, I said, what's the secret? And pretty much every one of them says the same thing. My wife is always right. So, yeah, interesting. Okay, don't forget now the celebration after the service in the Commons, chili dogs, have a good time. Try the bouncy house, be my guest.
Make your checks to Encore.
Yeah. So if you also remember one thing from Scott's lesson today that I picked up on, and I put it in my brain because we always somehow it's so easy to just become inactive. It's so easy not to do anything. It's so easy to become inactive. But remember, you got to do good, okay? You got to do good, but do no harm. Have a great Sunday. Be God with you.